Hi everyone, it's Yasmin from the College of Graduate Studies. So as promised, we're going to go ahead and record these workshops for you as you prepare for the 3-minute thesis competition. So this is super helpful if you weren't able to make a workshop or if you attended the workshops but you wanted to have the recording afterwards so that you could revisit what we talked about. We tell folks that it's always ideal to attend workshops whenever you can, just because you get that human interaction. You're able to run your materials by us, you're able to run materials by your fellow challengers. So without further ado, we'll just go ahead and get into our first of the workshop series. So this one is super important. So we're going to be talking about how to be successful whenever you're writing a script for the 3-minute thesis. So there is a worksheet that comes with this. We will have that link ready to go for you. So, we suggest that you follow along. We suggest that you work on that. It's a really great way of getting started, especially if you haven't competed in this competition before. So it's a really helpful resource. So whenever you are composing a script for the 3-minute thesis, you want to think of it as though you're writing a recipe for a dish. So you want to think about 5 important things here. So summing up your research in 3 minutes is challenging, but you want to think of it as an appetizer to, what is ultimately your dissertation or your thesis, so your dish. So you want it to be small enough to where it gives folks the substance of your work. So you're able to understand, what it is that you're researching, what it is that you're trying to find out, the significance of your research. And then you also want it to be palatable. So you want it to be easy to understand, easy to deliver. You want to satisfy your audience. So you want to give them the content that they need to understand a really general look at what you're doing. You also want to be able to spice it up. So whether that's adding humor, whether that's, assigning a certain tone to your 3-minute thesis, that's always a really great way of, especially distinguishing, your delivery. And then also you want to practice. So you really want to be able to taste test. You want to be able to practice so that you are staying under 3 minutes. You want to practice so that you're able to get your pacing down. So we'll talk more about each of these in detail. So when we're talking about having something that's bite-sized, we're talking about having something that's clear. We're talking about having something that is concise. So basically taking your research and summing it up. So also remembering that since you have 3 minutes, every single word that you have in your script has to count. So you want to have every single word serve a purpose. So we tell folks this is challenging, but the best way to start is to just write. So we tell folks write as much as you can, even if it's, pages on pages on pages, because what that does is it gives you material to cut things down. And then you can kind of begin to realize, okay, I can use this. I don't have to include this. But, being able to pick the areas that are most important for defining your research in kind of an elevator pitch type speech, right? So we tell folks it's initially, something where you want to write a lot. And then from there, you want to cut down. But you really want your 3-minute thesis to be an appetizer for, what you're doing. So, what your final piece looks like. So, like I said, you're giving folks an idea of what you're doing, what you're trying to find out, the significance of it, and you're just trying to get folks to, be acquainted with what you're doing, and you want them to care. So, we'll talk more about that too. And so, whenever we're talking about making your 3-minute thesis palatable, whenever you are creating your script, you want to think about ways that you can explain things, because what we're doing is we are creating a script that can be understood by both audiences in your profession or your field. And you also want folks who are not acquainted with your field to understand. So you're doing this for specialist and non-specialist audiences. So, for example, if you're in biomedical sciences, you want to write something to where your committee understands it, but you also want folks in, foundations of education or, folks that are in engineering or physics, you want them to also understand what you're doing too. So, is that going to be through, synonyms? Is that going to be through analogies? Is that going to be through, painting a picture? You're doing whatever you need to do to make your content more digestible to folks that aren't quite acquainted with, the terminology or, the jargon. And we'll talk more about, what to avoid when you're writing your script. So it's kind of a challenge in that way. So you also want to just think about, how can I make this understandable to folks? How can I get creative with that? And also, whenever you are writing your script, choosing words that are easy to say. So making it easy for you to deliver it. So, if there's a long, complicated word that, is in your research, is there a way to use another word? Is there something that would roll off the tongue easier? So making it easy to deliver to is also a huge part of writing your script. And so we talk about satisfy, right? So being able to include the main components in there. So your goal is to be able to sum up your research and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm trying to find out. Here's why it's relevant. And, being able to meet that so what factor, right? So, there's a common question that folks will ask with research, which is, so what? So why is this significant? What benefit is this going to be to the folks around you? So you really want to also make your audience care. You want to be able to relate it to their lives. Where does your research fit? What are the applications of your research? So you want to focus on that. So you want to be able to, again, describe what you're doing, describe what you're hoping to do, and also talk about the significance of your research. So those are the goals that you want to set as you're writing your script. So that's the direction that you want to head in. And so when we talk about spicing it up, you want to talk about what angle you want to take this at. So can you put humor in this? Is it appropriate to use humor? For some, it could be appropriate. For some, not so much. Can you use a metaphor? Can you use an analogy? Can you use a catchy hook to draw folks in? How are you getting your audience's attention and how are you keeping them engaged? Because that's also an important part of this that, judges will assess you on. And then finally, the taste test. So we tell folks it can be a little daunting to write a script where you're like, okay, I have to keep this under 3 minutes. How do I do it? But, practicing is the most important thing that you can do, whenever you are preparing for the 3-minute thesis. So we tell folks, practice in front of a mirror, practice, by recording yourself and playing it back. The timing is also really important here, practicing in front of your friends, your family, folks that aren't acquainted with your research, folks that are acquainted with your research. Finding ways that you can practice. And we'll talk about some considerations, especially when it comes to timing. So some general tips that we give people is that whenever you're writing a script, you want it to be a circle. So we tell people, don't always focus on writing the beginning first. It might be easier to start with the middle and end and then find a way to bring it back to the beginning because that could give you the idea for a hook. It could give you the idea for how to intro folks to your research. Being able to use active verbs. So like I said, every single word of your script matters. So whenever you are writing, you want to pay attention to whether you might be accidentally using passive voice. Can you turn that into active voice? Because if you can, that makes your script much more powerful and it makes your delivery much more powerful. So the KISS acronym basically means keep it simple, silly. So shorter words, sentences, paragraphs. So however you can condense things to where you're still communicating the important things, but you're not spending so much time on it. So wherever you can kind of save yourself time throughout your script is really important. And like I said, you're going to start by writing a lot, and we actually encourage that. So make sure you're writing as much as you can and then start cutting back from there. You want to have as much material to start with as possible. So we talked about how every single word counts, right? So whenever you are making every word count, you want to make sure that no matter what you do, you're making sure it's understandable to audiences of all different academic backgrounds. So avoiding academies and jargon whenever you can. What are other words you can use for those? Can you draw comparisons? And then helping them care, right? So being able to explain it in a way that helps folks understand what you're doing can also help them be more invested in your research. So what are some applications to your research? What is the significance of what you're doing? You want to make sure you include that in your script. And so your structure should be circular. So your beginning and end should tie into each other in some way. So as you're ending your 3-minute thesis, that should be a tie to the beginning. So whatever you mentioned in your intro, the end should also have a reference to that. So you want to be able to really make it look like a circle. And so whenever we talked about, it being an appetizer, I talked a little bit about how you have to write a lot. And we tell folks, write too much at the beginning because it gives you so much material to work with. So make sure you're doing that and then cut back. It's so much easier than trying to start out with a 3-minute script. Folks can definitely be much more successful if they're giving themselves more material to work with in the beginning. And so again, think about the hook. Think about how you're going to engage your audience because like I said, it's a really important part of what the judges look for. So when folks ask about how to pace their 3-minute thesis, we tell folks watch a stand-up comedy routine because the way that they deliver those routines is very similar to the pacing that you want to use whenever you are creating your script. And especially TV shows, whenever there's kind of a normal scene going on, think about how the actors are delivering their lines. So that's kind of the pace that you want to keep things at. And so whenever you are practicing, it's helpful to go slower than you plan to deliver it on the day of the qualifying round because what that does is it gives you a better idea of timing and it makes you more confident that you'll be able to keep it in under 3 minutes. So that's super important. So like I said, make sure that whenever you are practicing, speak slower than how you plan to speak on the day of the qualifying round. And then qualifying the unknown, right? So talking about the unknown in your research is also really important. So what are you trying to find out? What is there still to find out? Those are really important components and powerful components that you can use to really strengthen your script and your delivery. And then, like we said, make every single word count. So a 3-minute script is actually not much. If I remember correctly, it's 250 to 300 words. So you really want to make every single word of that count. So you don't have a whole lot of room. So you want to make sure that you are really focusing on everything you're putting in there. And again, making sure that whenever you are concluding, your conclusion really kind of goes back to what you were talking about in the beginning. So that's generally what we tell folks. And so we encourage using the worksheet that we shared with you. So definitely beginning to think about, what are my main takeaways? What are some things that I want my audience to remember? Are there words that I might use that might be, leaning into academies? Are there ways that I can reword that? So those are some really important initial things to think about. So what we tell folks is, especially if you're at the beginning of, the 3-minute thesis competition preparation, if this is your first competition, that worksheet is going to be a really helpful reference. So that kind of wraps up this workshop. We tell folks whenever you can, always great to come in person. If you can't, I'm hoping that this video was helpful. And again, let us know if you have any questions. But that is it. Thank you so much for watching this.